The solar smiled warmly over Iden that Saturday morning. It was a super day, the sort of day people might recollect for an extended long time at the very heart of the busy town Christ. The Redeemer Church stood tall and proud, its white walls shining brilliant below the clean blue sky. It wasn't just any church. This became in which the wealthy, the effective, and the well-known got here to pray Mary and bury their cherished ones. If you have been crucial, you wanted your wedding to manifest here. The whole compound became alive. Colorful flora lined the entrance. Lengthy white ribbons floated in the gentle breeze. Expensive cars drove in a single after the other, their engines buzzing like proud lions. Drivers in crisp uniforms rushed around establishing doors for guests dressed in the finest garments cash ought to purchase. Laughter, song, and the sweet smell of fresh roses crammed the air in the church. It was even more stunning. Golden chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, white and gold curtains framed the extensive glass windows, and sunlight poured in at the front of the church. Status calmly near the pulpit changed into Pastor Samuel Adami. He was a tall guy, a little spherical in the middle, with gentle type eyes and a mild smile. His black and gray hair showed his age, but his spirit changed into robust and complete of existence. Every body reputable. Pastor Samuel. He were serving in Christ the Redeemer for 25 years. He had married hundreds of couples. His voice became calm, smart, and while he spoke, even the proudest people listened. Today, Pastor Samuel wore his satisfactory white robe with gold embroidery. He held a small Bible in his palms and watched quietly as visitors found their seats. He smiled as he noticed familiar faces: politicians, enterprise tycoons, celebrities. However, he also noticed some faces he didn't recognize, faces that looked across the church with abnormal, restless eyes. He made an intellectual be aware, however, said not anything. These days turned into speculated to be an afternoon of joy. The bride Kemidme changed into the shining megastar of the day, daughter of considered one of Ibadan's wealthiest households. Kemi was cherished by many. She became acknowledged for her type, coronary heart, her beauty, and her simple ways. Despite her riches, humans said she turned into a true princess, now not just by wealth, however, by way of the goodness in her heart. Absolutely everyone agreed deserved a happy finishing, and nowadays she was marrying her childhood friend, a man named Faye Adabeo. Pastor Samuel adjusted his glasses and glanced at the clock. The rite might begin soon. He watched as the groom stood at the altar, wearing a pointy white suit, smiling hopefully. He turned into a handsome young man, tall and dark-skinned, with a captivating smile that made some of the visitors nod approvingly. However, Pastor Samuel, wise from years of revel in, observed something odd. The groom's smile regarded a little too tight, his fingers saved moving, straightening his tie, smoothing his jacket, tapping his fingers towards his thigh. Pastor Samuel had visible sufficient frightened grooms in his time, but this felt unique. It wasn't the candy anxiety of a person marrying the girl he cherished. No, it becomes something else, something more difficult to call. Still, Pastor Samuel said not anything. He whispered a quick prayer beneath his breath. Lord, if anything is hidden these days, carry it to light. The choir started out to sing softly. Guests leaned forward, anticipating the grand second. Every person turned into excited. Cameras flashed, whispered conversations floated through the air. She looks like a queen, a person said. I heard they met once more after a few years overseas. Every other voice delivered they are a really perfect fit, a third individual stated optimistically. But Pastor Samuel's coronary heart grew heavier. He watched as little flower ladies in pink dresses scattered petals down the aisle. He watched the groom look nervously in the direction of the doorway. And then the song changed. A gentle, gradual, stunning tune filled the church. Each head turned there. She was. Kem stood at the doorway, wearing a wide-ranging white robe that shimmered like 1,000 stars. An extended veil covered her face. However, her graceful stroll and proud posture left no question. She became each bit the princess they had all imagined. As she commenced her slow stroll down the aisle, arm related along with her father's visitors rose to their FT. The groom's smile widened. However, Pastor Samuel noticed how he shifted on his FT like a man making ready to run again. And Pastor Samuel prayed silently, Lord, guide me if this marriage isn't always right. Forestall it these days. As Kem got here closer, the groom reached out his hand. Their arms brushed for a second. The entirety seemed best. And yet deep inside his spirit pastor, Samuel felt it, an abnormal cold breeze of warning. Some thing changed into incorrect, something changed into very wrong. But what it turned into he couldn't but see no longer, but to absolutely everyone watching this changed into the correct love tale, a fairy tale come to lifestyles. But each story has a beginning, and Kemi's had commenced many years in the past, long earlier than nowadays, lengthy earlier than the white gown and the flashing cameras. Kem Adami had grown up in existence. Many ought to handiest dream of her father, changed into one of the richest men in Ibadan, regarded for his hotel's real property and effective friends. However, despite all of the money in the global, Kemi's early life changed into no longer full of snobbish parties or gold-plated toys. Her mother and father had raised her, actually coaching her to be kind, humble, and beneficent. As a bit female, Kemi's favorite reminiscences have been no longer in grand ballrooms or five-star lodges. They had been in the dusty gardens of their antique family home, strolling barefoot together with her first-class buddy, a boy named Femi Adabio. Femi's circle of relatives became now not as rich as Kemi's, but their friendship have been pure and sturdy. They spent hours mountain climbing bushes, chasing goats, and dreaming about the destiny. We'll be first-rate pals for all time, Femi had stated as soon as his small hand clutching hers. KMI had believed him with all her coronary heart, but existence had different plans. Femi's circle of relatives moved abroad after they had been still young. His father had gotten a process opportunity in London, and similar to that, Femi become gone. No goodbye, no letters, no cell phone calls, simplest silence. Kem had cried for weeks. She had stored a small wood bracelet. Faye had given her an easy thing, worn and diminished. However, to her it became valuable. As the years passed, she buried the memory deep in her heart. She grew right into a stunning young girl, studied enterprise at a prestigious college, and took her region beside her father. Within the circle of relatives, empire suitors came and went, but none touched her heart. Then one wet night, the whole thing modified. Kem had just returned from a long assembly, whilst her telephone buzzed a message request on Instagram from a name she hadn't heard in years. Femi Adabio. Her palms shook as she opened it. Kem, is it really you after all these years? I can't accept as true with it. Please say we will meet at the beginning. She thought it become a comic story, perhaps a ripoff. But after they started out chatting, sharing antique reminiscences, best the real Faye could recognize her coronary heart started out to consider again. He instructed her how he had lost contact due to the strict existence his dad and mom compelled on him abroad, how he had searched for her oftentimes, but in no way discovered her until a mutual pal published an old photograph. Femi apologized time and again for the years misplaced, and Kem, along with her gentle coronary heart, told him it was not his fault, pronouncing she nevertheless has the bracelet he once gifted her too effortlessly. They agreed to satisfy the day. They noticed each other again, become like a scene from a film it turned into at a secure espresso store tucked away in Ekoi. Kem had worn an easy dress, too worried to even put on makeup. However, while Faye walked in tall, good-looking, sporting a shy smile, her coronary heart had leapt. He was no longer the thin boy she remembered. He became a person now, assured, charming, complete of candy words that made her chuckle and blush like a faculty female. They talked for hours about formative years, reminiscences, approximately dreams, approximately how atypical and exquisite life can be. It became like time had folded in on itself, bringing them again collectively. Precisely in which they had left off from that day, they were inseparable. Dinners became lengthy night walks, smartphone calls, was weekend journeys. Laughter changed into shy touches, smooth kisses and whispered guarantees. And before ought to even capture her breath, Femi was down on one knee asking her to marry him. She said sure, with tears in her eyes, believing along with her entire heart that future had added her first love. Lower back, her dad and mom were cautious. At first, they requested questions, raised eyebrows, but seeing how satisfied Kem become, how complete of life she had end up once more, they agreed in any case who ought to stand within the way of actual love. The wedding planning began nearly immediately. Every element needed to be best, nothing however the best for their daughter. And now, right here, They were the entire city humming with pleasure, Christ the Redeemer Church filled. With the cream of society collected to witness the magical reunion of youth sweethearts, only Pastor Samuel Status, quietly with the aid of the altar, felt the faint whisper of unease. He watched the groom. Cautiously Femio, Pastor Samuel's instincts sharpened with the aid of years of guiding souls. Through love, loss, and lies, informed him something changed into off the way. Femi's eyes darted around the worried snigger that regarded too practiced the manner. He prevented antique, unplanned tales, whilst guests tried to tease him about his adolescence days with Chem. Pastor Samuel kept his peace for. Now it became no longer but time to speak the gang side with happiness. The ceremony became about to start, and deep inside the quiet places of Pastor Samuel's heart, a typhoon was slowly starting to acquire to all and sundry else in the church, the day become unfolding like a dream, but to Pastor Samuel it turned into like watching a stunning portrait slowly cracking at the rims. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It became quiet, small matters. However, on occasion, the small matters informed the largest truths. It had commenced 2 weeks earlier than the wedding ceremony throughout the premarital counseling sessions. It become a culture at Christ the Redeemer Church that each couple need to take a seat with Pastor Samuel for counseling, a threat to prepare their hearts, not just their outfits for marriage. Chem had been glowing, excited, giggling shyly at every query. However, Faye have been special at the beginning. Pastor Samuel had notion it changed into simply nerves. Many younger guys have become shy whilst talking of affection in front of a pastor. But quickly he noticed things that made his coronary heart heavy. One afternoon throughout counseling, Pastor Samuel requested a simple question. Femi, which competition did you and Chem used to attend as kids in Ibadan? Femi smiled and responded, of direction. Sir, we usually celebrated the Yam pageant collectively in April. Chem nodded thankfully beside him. However, Pastor Samuel's heart sank. The Yam pageant, the traditional one in Ibadan, became celebrated in August, no longer April. Every Yoruba child who grew up in Ibadan knew this April turned into too early. Handiest someone who had read about it at the internet or heard approximately at halfway would make that mistake. Pastor Samuel stated nothing. He really smiled and continued, but in his thoughts, a small stone have been dropped right into a nevertheless pond. Ripples of doubt began to spread every other time at some stage in a light communique after carrier A person had jokingly asked, Faye, you bear in mind Mama Titi stand near your vintage house? Femi laughed and stated, ah yes, Mama Titi, the only who used to promote roasted yams and plantain on the junction. The group had laughed courteously. However, Pastor Samuel had stuck it once more. Every person who actually grew up in that place knew Mama Titi, became famous for her akara, the pleasant bean cakes in town. No longer yam and plantain. Roasted yam sellers were across the marketplace, rectangular, not near the homes. It turned into every other tiny crack, but it was there. And then there had been the dodged questions when asked approximately. His family. Faye could lower his eyes, sigh deeply, and say things like, it's too painful to talk about. I lost many own family members overseas. I might instead not remember. I'm all on my own now. Before everything, humans respected his grief. However, after the 33 or 4th time, Pastor Samuel began to sense something was incorrect. It wasn't just disappointment in Femi's voice. It changed into avoidance, a man hiding behind a wall, not mourning in the back of it. Pastor Samuel needed. He may want to disregard the sensation. However, he had visible too many marriages built on lies fall apart like sand castles within the rain. Then came the request that genuinely afflicted him at some stage in the very last wedding practice session. As they walked through this system, Faye had leaned close to Pastor Samuel and said, Sir, can we make the ceremony shorter, perhaps bypass the communicate now or forever, keep your peace component? He had laughed, gently brushing it off as anxiousness. You recognize once in a while human beings reason useless drama at weddings. We simply want a clean day, no interruptions. Chem had regarded, barely amazed. Wow, Faye, are you hiding a secret fiancé? You don't need me to know approximately. Come on, babe, you already know, which can by no means happen. He responded sharply. She didn't say extra, she had simplest asked the question as a comic story. She relied on him completely. But Pastor Samuel froze inside the speak now or all the time maintain your peace was not simply a flowery subculture. It was an effective spiritual moment, a threat for reality. To be spoken if all of us knew a cause why the marriage have to not appear no sincere, Guy might worry it. Pastor Samuel gave a small smile and stated gently, "Ah, my son, no wedding is without small fears. However, fact and love have nothing to hide. We are able to preserve the whole software. Agree with me. You will be thankful." Femi had nodded quick, but Pastor Samuel noticed the sparkle of frustration in his eyes earlier, then he masked it some other crack. Another whisper in Pastor Samuel's spirit that everyone became not well now status at the altar watching Faye and Kem together. Pastor Samuel felt the overall weight of those tiny cracks pressing down on his heart. Femi held Kemi's hand. With just a little an excessive amount of pressure, he smiled a little too huge. While people checked out him, he scanned the group like a man expecting something or someone to leap out to the guests. It seemed like regular nerves to Pastor Samuel. It gave the look of a person standing on the brink of a cliff, praying no one noticed the floor crumbling under his toes. He might proceed with the rite, however he saved his spirit sharp, his coronary heart open, and his prayers regular. If there has been something hidden these days of beauty, God would display it, even supposing it broke hearts, even supposing it stopped the wedding. He had learned over time that when your spirit refuses to relaxation, it's better to listen. And these days God turned into in reality, whispering something. The primary actual crack came 2 days earlier than the marriage. It became a quiet afternoon. The solar turned into hot, the sky wide and blue. Pastor Samuel sat by myself in his small workplace in the back of Christ, the Redeemer Church, going via very last wedding ceremony preparations, when there became a tender knock on his door. "Come in," he called. An old guy stepped in cautiously. Ultimate the door in the back of him. He wore a simple brown agata and walked with the sluggish carefulness of a person who had seen a few years. His face was coated with age, but his eyes have been sharp and stressed. "Excellent afternoon, sir," the person stated, bowing barely. "True afternoon, Baba," Pastor Samuel replied warmly, standing to offer him a seat. "Please come in." The antique man sat down slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his cap. "My name is Baba Adabio," he stated quietly. I used to be the uncle of Femi Adabio." The words struck Pastor Samuel like a cold wind. "You are Femi's uncle?" he asked gently, although he saved his face calm. "Sure, Pastor Baba said. However, that man marrying tomorrow, the only they call Femi something, is not right." Pastor Samuel leaned ahead, barely, his heart beating faster. "What do you imply, Baba?" Baba's voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "I saw the marriage statement. I noticed his photograph, and my heart grew bloodless. That isn't my nephew, Pastor." The room appeared to shrink around them. "But are you positive? Perhaps he has modified over time?" Pastor Sam asked carefully. Baba shook his head firmly. "I know my blood. I recognize Faye. That guy looks like him, talks almost like him. But he isn't always him." Femi could by no means conceal from his family, by no means. And there are matters, small matters, that only family can see. Pastor Samuel sat, returned slowly, the whole weight of Baba's phrases deciding on him like a heavy cloak. It became one element to feel uneasy. It became any other component entirely to have a blood relative boost the alarm. The elder man leaned nearer, reducing his voice. "Even extra, Femi's parents are late, and that I clearly haven't seen him for a long term. However, something just doesn't seem right. I suppose there is a way you can realize for positive." Pastor Femi had a beginning mark shaped like a star in the back of his proper ear from delivery. "If that man does no longer have it, he's mendacity." Silence filled the room. Pastor Samuel nodded slowly, a troubled appearance clouding his face. "Thanks, Baba," he said ultimately. "I might be watchful." Baba stood up, adjusting his cap. "I've said my piece, the rest is to your fingers, Pastor." Without some other word, the vintage man left, shifting quietly like a shadow, fading into the afternoon. Solar. Pastor Samuel sat nevertheless for a long time after the door closed. His fingers rested on the Bible on his table. However, his mind became far away. He prayed silently, asking for information. What became certainly going on here ought to it's true. That nighttime, Pastor Samuel decided to act cautiously all through the final private assembly with the couple before the church closed its doorways for the night. He smiled warmly at them and said, Tell me again how you both reconnected. It is such a stunning tale. Kem beamed her eyes glowing with love. Femi determined me online pastor through a chum who posted an antique faculty picture. He said he recognized me immediately. Pastor Samuel nodded thoughtfully. And your reminiscences, Faye, tell me what turned into your favored vicinity to play when you have been. Small here in Abaddon, Femi chuckled nervously. Ah, pasta. It's been goodbye, you understand how memory is. But I think yes, we always played on the big fountain in Bodhija. Kem laughed, gently beside him. Sure, pastor, the Bodhija fountain. Pastor Samuel smiled lightly, but internal he frowned. There was no famous fountain in Bodhija. For the duration of their youth days, Bodhija became recognized for its big marketplace and quiet residential estates. Now not any public fountains again, a small mistake, however, earlier than he could press. In addition, Kem located her hand protectively on Femi's arm and said, Pastor, please, the one's formative years recollections are thus far away now. What subjects is our future together? Her voice turned into gentle but firm. Pastor Samuel observed the way Femi's shoulders comfortable right now after she spoke, almost as if he had been protecting his breath. The pastor nodded, still smiling warmly, but his coronary heart etched. Kemi's love for Faye was deep and blind. She failed to see the small incorrect turns. She did not word the moments of hesitation, the odd answers, the quiet panic in his eyes. She had already decided to accept as true and now she turned into defensive him, without even figuring out it that night after locking the church doors and blessing the empty halls with prayer. Pastor Samuel stood on my own underneath the cold stars. He seemed up into the extensive dark sky and whispered, Father, you spot what we can't see. If this wedding is constructed on lies, tear down the mask. Reveal the truth, irrespective of how painful. The wind carried his words away into the night time, and somewhere in the heavy silence of the metropolis, problem stirred, awaiting the right second to come crashing into the mild out of doors. The church, a protracted line of costly vehicles stretched around the road, sleek black SUVs, shining Benzes, and even some Rolls-Royces. Guys in clever suits and women in flowing asobi fabrics of gold and teal streamed through the gates, their laughter filling the air within the church. The pews were packed. Politicians sat side by using facet with celebrities, top commercial enterprise proprietors, conventional rulers, and old circle of relatives. Friends crammed to the front rows, fanning themselves lightly and whispering excitedly about the couple. This is the wedding of the, a person stated with a proud smile. I heard even the governor is attending, another whispered. The surroundings turned into electric. It buzzed with track cash and the scent of pricey perfumes. On the center of all of it, at the very end of the lengthy aisle, stood Pastor Samuel Adami. He held his Bible tightly, a calm figure in the middle of all of the exhilaration. However internal, his spirit was some distance from calm. His eyes watched everything. His coronary heart listened to the silent areas between the laughter, and again, that quiet voice in his spirit warned him, be ready. Kemi was glowing. She turned into full of belief, complete of desire, full of dreams. She had no idea about the typhoon quietly collecting above her head. She had no concept that the man waiting at the altar won't be who he claimed to be. Pastor Samuel prayed quietly before he opened his mouth. He prayed for power, for clarity, for braveness, due to the fact he knew that today turned into no longer just about vows and rings. Nowadays, turned into a battlefield among fact and deception. He led the couple via the prayers, the hymns, the blessings. The crowd watched with shining eyes. Many dabbed their faces with handkerchiefs. Some snapped snapshots quietly with their telephones. The whole lot seemed best. Eventually, Pastor Samuel reached the part of the rite that Faye had once tried to cast off. The part Faye had feared. Pastor Samuel's voice rang out clean and robust. If anybody here is aware of a motive why these need to not be joined in holy matrimony, allow them to talk now, or for all time preserve their peace. Silence fell over the church like a heavy blanket. It lasted a second, 2 seconds. 3 humans smiled, a few giggled softly, already preparing to rejoice, and then a chair scraped loudly towards the tiled floor. Heads turned sharply from the zero 33 row, a figure stood up. It became Baba Adabio. Kemi's smile faltered. Femi's fingers tightened round Kemi's hands, no longer in love, but in fear. Baba, old, however sturdy in spirit, pointed a trembling finger in the direction of the groom and stated loudly, his voice shaking with ache and anger, "That man isn't my nephew." The church gasped. A low murmur unfolded through the gang like wildfire. Kem turned sharply to examine Femi, confusion and worry in her wide eyes. Femi's face turned pale, the coloration draining from his cheeks. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Pastor Samuel took a deep, steady breath. The instant he had prayed for, the moment he had feared, had come. The mask become cracking, and the truth, whatever it was, turned into approximately to interrupt loose. The church became now not quiet after Baba's loud accusation. The environment cracked open like a broken drum. Murmurs rose anywhere her sharp. Whispers, gasps, pressured seams. Kem stood frozen, looking at Femi. Her hand trembled in his. She attempted to shrink back lightly, however he held on too tightly. Pastor Samuel stepped forward, his voice calm but company. "Brother Fay," he said, searching instantly into the younger guy's eyes. "You have heard the accusation. For the peace of all gathered here today, please speak." Femi swallowed hard, his jaw tightened, then he shook his head speedy and compelled a small, shaky laugh. "Pastor, please. I don't know what is going on. Maybe Baba is burdened. It's been years, due to the fact that he saw me people trade." He became to the visitors, trying to smile. "I am Fay Adabio Kemi's formative years. Pal, please, let's now not destroy this beautiful day with confusion." The murmurs grew louder. A few human beings nodded uncertainly. Others frowned, exchanging worried glances. Kem looked at him. Her lips parted as if she desired to speak, but failed to recognize what to mention. Pastor Samuel raised his hand lightly, and the gang slowly quieted down. He looked at Femi with constant smart eyes and stated, "Brother Fay, if there may be no cause for doubt, then this can be simple." The elder stated, "A birthmark, a star-fashioned birthmark at the back of your proper ear. Will you please display it to us?" The whole church regarded to lean ahead at once. Femi iced over for one lengthy second. He stood there stiff as a statue. Then very slowly he raised his hand to the lower back of his ear and paused. His palms hovered there, unsure. "Pastor," he said, forcing every other shaky chortle, I had surgical operation years in the past. I removed the birthmark. It become ugly. I failed to find it irresistible." There was another sharp murmur from the gang. A person whispered loudly, "Who gets rid of a start mark from behind the ear?" Any other voice extra skeptical. Lies. Pastor Samuel remained calm. He took a few gradual steps closer to Femi. "Brother Fay," he stated softly, "you assert you removed it, but actually, there might still be a scar, something. Let us see. Permit every person have peace these days." Femi shook his head once more desperately. "Now, please, Pastor, let's not make a scene. I respect you. However, this is now not vital. Kemi knows me. She believes in me." He checked out Kem, his eyes pleading. Kem seemed torn, her coronary heart fighting her head. She opened her mouth to speak, but Pastor Samuel raised his hand again. "Let us see." The pastor said, his voice carrying the overall authority of a man who had walked with God for many years. There was no escape. Slowly, Femi became his head and pulled his ear forward. Gasps crammed the church. There has been nothing there. No birthmark, no scar, nothing, just clean, untouched skin. The air grew heavy, thick with shock. Pastor Samuel's voice stayed calm, almost gentle. "My son, you spot now why questions. Stand up, please. Communicate the truth. God continues to be merciful." Femi's shoulders sagged, the energy regarded to drain out of him. He licked his dry lips, suffering to find phrases. Subsequently, after an extended, painful silence, he stated, "I am no longer Femi. I did realize the actual Fay we met at university abroad. He turned into like a brother to me." The gasps around the church had been loud. A few ladies protected their mouths. An elder guy shook his head slowly. A person close to the lower back whispered, "Blood of Jesus." Femi endured, his voice low and trembling. "We were near pleasant friends, nearly like family, whilst Fay were given unwell before he surpassed. He made me promise." Tears welled up in his eyes. "He made me promise to attend to the humans he loved. He informed me to stay for him, to be his own family, for the reason that he had no one left. He had currently related with Kem. and did not want to harm her. A few people in the group frowned, stressed others shook their heads, slowly not shopping for the tale. Pastor Samuel's eyes stayed sharp, kind, however unrelenting. You are pronouncing, the pastor requested quietly, that your buddy before demise requested you to to be him. Femi nodded. Speedy, yes, pastor, out of love, out of loyalty. I did not mean harm. I just wanted to hold his memory alive, to be the man he would were. I loved him like a brother. He regarded around the church, eyes wild with desperation. He loves Kem, he cried. I didn't plan this to harm absolutely everyone. I was honoring my pal's death want, and alongside the manner I fell in love with Kem too. For a moment, the church was silent once more. A few soft sobs might be heard. It changed into a sad tale, a story that could pull at the heart. However, Pastor Samuel, wise beyond his years, did no longer flow. He looked Femi cautiously, and then he requested, if you have been simply so near my son, why are your memories so indistinct, particularly recollections with Kem? I think in case your friend desired you to be him, he will fill you in on the fundamentals as a minimum. Femi opened his mouth and closed it once more. His eyes dotted around, searching for a solution that wouldn't come. The cracks had been now too extensive. The story changed into breaking apart within the outside. Pastor Samuel's voice becomes smooth, however robust. You see, my son, the fact is easy. It does now not stumble, it does not disguise. Kem stood trembling, her hands clenched collectively. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at the man she had trusted, the person she had almost married. And for the primary time, deep in her heart, a small voice whispered to her, this isn't the boy you as soon as loved. The painting was falling apart. The masks changed into slipping, and the overall ugly truth became approximately to pop out. The church became drowning in silence. Nobody spoke. No person moved. Even the candles seemed to burn slower, as though the air had thickened around them. Femi, or the man who referred to as himself, Femi, stood trembling at the altar. Kemi's tears had already started out, falling silent rivers down her cheeks. Pastor Samuel remained consistent status among fact and lies, refusing to appearance away. Subsequently, underneath the heavy weight of watching eyes and the sharp ache of his personal shame, the man broke. He decreased his head, and when he lifted it again, the charming masks become gone. In its vicinity became a tired, crushed face, a face sporting years of lies and loneliness. The person straightened, his returned, swallowing hard, and said louder, my actual call is Chindu Nasu. The name hung in the air like a slap. Chindu, an Igbo man, a stranger to the world of Kemadai, and the Super Addy own family. Pastor Samuel's voice turned into mild, however firm. Inform us the whole thing, Chindu, it all. Chindu closed his eyes for a protracted moment. While he opened them, the phrases spilled out like a flood. I was Femi's roommate abroad. He commenced. We met at college. I was there on a scholarship, a bad boy from a damaged village. I had not anything, no mother and father, no domestic, just a dream and tough paintings. The group listened, shocked. Femi became the whole lot I wasn't. Chindu persisted bitterly. He had cash connections, a future already expecting him. Chindu's voice cracked with the weight of vintage memories. Whilst Faye misplaced his dad and mom in a car twist of fate he modified, he became lonely, damaged. It is when he started out speaking, approximately reconnecting with Kem, the woman he had cherished. Considering that formative years, Pastor Samuel nodded slowly, urging him to go on. He might show me her photographs. Chindu said he talked about her like she became light in a dark international. He deliberate to locate her, to build existence together with her. Some human beings wiped their eyes quietly at the tale, and then Chindu's voice grew. Femi got into a twist of fate. The church held its breath. Chindu paused, fighting tears of his own. I held his hand when he died. It became a horrible automobile twist of fate. The sadness in his voice became no longer actual, and Pastor Samuel knew sadness does not wash away betrayal, and Chindu's betrayal turned into nevertheless waiting to be confessed. Chindu's fingers shook barely as he persisted. After Femi's death, I was misplaced. I had no papers, no money, no domestic. I used to be drowning. He regarded up, eyes full of desperate honesty. Then I remembered Kem. I remembered the rich, lovely woman he loved, the one he by no means got to fulfill again. Kem flinched at his words like he had slapped her. I discovered his vintage messages, his images, his memories of her, and I made a desire. The gang leaned in Hearts pounding, I used social media. I used vintage contacts. I constructed myself into Femi Adabio Shindu's voice, hardened the truth, spilling out at final. I made myself into the man Kem would really like. I got here, returned to Nigeria. I found her. I used the whole thing. I knew the entirety I saw. From their chats to win her coronary heart, Kemi's knees buckled barely. Her father rushed forward to regular her, but she shook her head stubbornly. Status tall in her ache pastor. Samuel's voice became low, but effective. Why Chindu laughed bitterly, a whole sound that bounced off the church partitions. Cash, energy, freedom. He threw his palms out helplessly. I used to be tired of being the terrible boy who slept on the ground board with begging, suffering, dwelling hand to mouth. This was my risk. He pointed closer to Kemi's family, seated inside the front. Rose, marry her, inherit the agree with fund step. Into an existence of comfort and recognize no extra debts, no extra empty pockets, no greater disgrace. His voice broke with anger and remorse. I deserve, after all the struggling, after all of the loneliness. The church became silent once more now, not because they understood, but because they have been. Too shocked to talk, Pastor Samuel stepped nearer, his voice trembling with holy sadness. And what about love, my son? What approximately Kemi's heart? What approximately her goals? Chindu's shoulders sagged for the primary time. He regarded, virtually ashamed. I attempted to love her, he whispered, however. Then I reminded myself, I don't have time for love. I knew what I wanted, and that I needed to stay targeted. He dropped to his knees right there at the altar. I am sorry, he said, his voice breaking into sobs. I am sorry. However, the harm became achieved, the fairy story become shattered, the dream changed into over, and now, best, the pieces remained for a protracted moment. After Chinadu's confession, nobody within the church moved. It changed into just like the entire world had frozen. Kemi stood nonetheless on the altar. Her veil driven back, her face pale and damaged. The lovely goals she had held on to so tightly had fallen apart proper before her eyes. Tears ran freely down her cheeks. However, she did not wipe them away. She stood sturdy like a tree battered by the hurricane, refusing to fall. Chindu remained kneeling, his sobs filling the church. However, no one moved to consolation him. He had selected this direction, and now he could stroll it alone all at once. As though a switch flipped in him, Chindu rose to his toes and turned sharply toward the side door. He bolted. He ran down the aisle beyond the shocked guests, knocking over a flower stand. In his rush, gasps and cries stuffed the church once more. Stop him, someone shouted. However, before Chindu may want to even reach the door, two tall guys in dark fits improved unexpectedly. They grabbed him firmly by way of the arms. Chindu struggled for a 2D, wild with fear. However, he changed into no suit for them. They twisted his hands gently, however firmly, in the back of his back, leading him out of the church. The gang parted silently to allow them to bypass. Chindu's head hung low, disgrace covering him like a dark cloud. Kemi's father, Chief Edmai, watched all of it unfold with tight, unhappy eyes. He stepped as much as Pastor Samuel and whispered, "Thank you, Pastor, thanks for making ready us." Pastor Samuel only nodded, his face complete of deep sorrow. The night earlier than the marriage, Pastor Samuel had quietly met with Chief Edmai. He had laid out all his quiet observations. He had not desired to cause panic. However, he had insisted, "For your daughter's protection, sir, let there be security on standby, just in case." Leader Edmai, a sensible guy in spite of his pride, had listened, and now that easy act of education had saved them from extra shame and deeper catastrophe. The wedding guests slowly began to leave, whispering amongst themselves. Some shook their heads lamentably, a few hugged Kem gently before leaving. A few wept brazenly. No one blamed her. They blamed the wickedness of deceit, the cruelty of a person who had twisted love into a weapon. Within the days that accompanied the news unfold across Ibadan like wildfire, eyes saved from fake groom on the altar. Pastor Samuel exposes imposter for the duration of grand wedding. Kedem's heartbreak sparks countrywide communique on consider and identity. Each person had an opinion, all people had a principle. But at the back of the flashing headlines and noisy gossip, a young woman sat quietly in her circle of relatives' home, seeking to heal. Kem did not conceal. She did not run away to London or NY, though she could have. She stayed. She grieved overtly. She allowed herself to cry to break, to be angry, but she did now not let bitterness wreck her slowly day via day. She picked up the shattered portions of her coronary heart with the guide of her circle of relatives, her real buddies, and a community that loved her even more now for her energy. Kem observed a brand new cause 3 months after the marriage catastrophe. Kem held her first public occasion, a seminar on girls' rights and fraud attention. She stood on the small stage, her voice regular and clean. "I trusted blindly," she said. "I left out the small signs due to the fact I desired to consider in love today. I know better, and I can use my story to assist others, to assist others combat for his or her dignity, and shield their desires." The corridor erupted in applause, and someplace, on the returned pastor, Samuel smiled quietly. Proud of the younger female who refused to be defeated lifestyles, moved at the season's modified Christ, the Redeemer Church, persisted to face tall, a little wiser, a touch more watchful pastor. Samuel's sermons carried a deeper hearth, now a reminder that love must be constructed on truth, no longer fable. And Kem, she shone brighter than ever, not due to cash, now not due to reputation, but because she had walked via hearth and pop-out gold. The heartbreak had no longer destroyed her, it had best refined her. And although her coronary heart still carried scars, it also carried new energy, the type of strength that could most effective be found on the opposite side of broken goals. 6 months later, the town of Abaddon was back to its regular rhythm, busy streets, noisy markets, and heat, dusty sunsets. However, for Christ, the Redeemer Church, something had quietly changed since that unforgettable wedding. Ceremony Day Pastor Samuel Adami had emerged as greater than just a pastor. He had become an image, a reminder that know-how and braveness could still stand in opposition to deceit. People got here from far and near to listen him preach now, and each Sunday the church overflowed with new faces, all keen to listen. The person who had dared to prevent a marriage, who had dared to guard a daughter of the land. One particular Sunday, the church turned into packed. Pastor Samuel stood at the pulpit, his Bible open, his voice calm and robust. He spoke no longer with anger, but with deep kindness, the sort that touches hearts. People of God, he commenced his voice, wearing via the hall. Discernment is a gift, blind consider, is a risk. He paused, searching into the ocean of faces. Love is stunning, but love have to now not be blind. Wish is powerful, however, desire ought to stroll hand in hand with wisdom. The congregation nodded slowly, listening cautiously. In case you experience uneasy, Pastor Samuel persisted. If something deep interior whispers that something is incorrect, concentrate, pray, watch, wait. He closed his Bible lightly. God does no longer rush. Divine timing is by no means moved quickly. He famous, what have to be found out when it have to be revealed. A tender amen rolled via the group, and many, specially the younger women, held his words close to their hearts. Pastor Samuel smiled warmly. He had no bitterness closer to Chindu handiest unhappiness. However, he was happy, deeply satisfied that the truth had been revealed earlier than it become too overdue. As for Kemi, life became slowly weaving itself into something new. The ache had now not disappeared in a single day, but recuperation had started. Quiet, affected person, consistent. Kem threw herself into her new basis, the mild basis, and corporations supporting young women avoid fraud and fight for their rights. Her days had been complete now, of workshops, seminars, visits to schools, and countless smiles of gratitude from the ladies she stimulated. She had become her heartbreak right into a lighthouse for others, but deep down a small part of her nevertheless puzzled, might I ever discover real love? No longer a love built on cash, no longer a love constructed on lies, but a love built on reality and fate, as it regularly does. Spoke back, whilst she least anticipated. It became a quiet afternoon. Kem had long passed to a neighborhood clinic to donate academic substances. She wasn't wearing designer garments that day, only a simple white shirt, denims, and sandals. No makeup, no earrings, just herself. She changed into supporting the medical institution body of workers deliver books, while she stumbled, barely losing a heavy container. Permit me help you? A mild voice stated. She regarded up a young man in simple garments, a health facility volunteer uniform, bent down to select up the field. His hands were rough with work, but his smile became tender. Proper, thank you. Kem said, a bit breathless. The person smiled, once more lifting the field effortlessly. I'm Daniel, he stated sincerely. I paintings right here, element time. What is your name? No point out of reputation, no look at her face in popularity, no awkward stares about her beyond simply kindness, simply persistence. For the first time in a long term, Kemi's heart skipped, no longer in fear, not in confusion, however, in quiet desire. They talked for a couple of minutes, approximately. Books, children, and desires. It wasn't fireworks, it wasn't lightning, it was something better. It changed into peace. Pastor Samuel could later smile knowingly, whilst Kem advised him about Daniel. You see, he stated, real love does no longer shout, it does now not pretend, it does no longer come wrapped in gold. It is available in reality, in kindness, in staying power. And Kem, wiser, now stronger, now new. He turned into proper. She had walked through the fireplace, she had cried through the typhoon. And now, sooner or later, she turned into moving into the gentle sunrise of an ultramodern day, now not as the damaged eyes who became fooled at the altar, however, because the woman who chose to rise again, stronger, braver, and prepared for a love that become real.